In this section, we will discuss BCP or business continuity planning or contingency planning. Contingency plans need to be written to ensure continuous service and minimize the effect of disruptions. The plan should comply with the overall business continuity plan and should be based on a long-range information systems plan. So what's a BCP or a contingency plan? It's a plan that is being prepared to be used in case of emergencies. It's a plan to re-establish the organization's processing and telecommunication network, since the telecommunication are key to business processes and their continuity should also be given sufficient concern. In many situations, insurance with sufficient coverage should be purchased, potentially covering the cost to recover from a failure, the software recovery cost, and business disruption cost. This insurance is becoming very expensive these days due to the increase of cyber attacks and data breaches, but it is a good option to have it in place. There should be as well plans to procure alternative hardware, either from a specialized vendor if the destroyed hardware was originally customized, or off the shelf if there are components that are readily available in the market. You also need to maintain an offsite location with updated applications or software. You also need to do periodic testing for recovery and continuity in planning. You also need to maintain the recovery and continuity plan. You need to update it on a regular basis. And you also should state the individuals or the teams who are responsible for the various functions during the recovery phase. So again, BCP or contingency plan is a plan B, what to do under adverse circumstances. Contingency planning begins with data classification. You can classify your data or you can classify your systems. It is up to you, but the same approach applies. You can classify your systems as being critical, vital, sensitive, or non-critical. You can do the same for your data. So critical, it means that these systems cannot tolerate disruption, and thus the cost of their disruption would be high. They can only be performed with the replacement of identical capabilities and may not be performed manually. So you need the system. You need to replace the system in case there is a downtime. And these systems cannot tolerate disruption because it will affect the business severely. Vital systems have relatively higher tolerance for disruption than critical systems, and thus the cost of their disruption would be relatively lower than the cost associated with the disruption of critical systems. The system's functions may be performed manually, but for a limited time. So under adverse circumstances, you can do that manually for a certain period of time. However, you cannot do the same for critical systems. Sensitive systems have high tolerance of disruption, and the functions may be performed manually over an extended period of time. And the non-critical ones, the cost of disruption is really negligible. So you need to know the systems that you have, and you need to know the criticality of the systems you have in order to plan the business continuity planning or the contingency plan. For this sake as well, we have defined two factors or two parameters or metrics to be used in the BCP. The first one is called recovery point objective, and the second one is called recovery time objective, RPO and RTO. So the RPO actually is the amount of lost data. So the disaster happens, as you can see here, on the yellow splash. So the lost data is actually called RPO. When was the last time you backed up your data is the amount of data that you are willing to lose. Meanwhile, the RTO is the time required for the IT staff to bring down a system. So for example, if a system is backed up every 24 hours, right? And a disaster hit after the backup with 10 hours. So you have the RPO as 10 hours because you lost 10 hours of data, right? Because the backup was made in the previous or in the recent 10 hours. So 10 hours is the lost data. Meanwhile, RTO is the time required for the IT staff to put the system online again. There are many recovery alternatives. The first one is to duplicate your information processing facilities, especially if you have critical systems and you cannot tolerate downtime. You can duplicate them to another site, and in this case you need to maintain 2 sites. Of course, this comes with a high cost, and this is called real-time sites or fully duplicated sites. The second type of sites you can maintain or you can use under adverse circumstances is called the hot site, which are fully configured and equipped sites that may be ready to operate within a few hours. You just need to do some maintenance. It only requires staff to relocate, for example, and to install a few programs, and the site is up and running in a few hours. Warm sites are sites that are partially configured with peripherals and network connectivity. However, they need to be ready within a couple of hours, which is more than the hot site. If the hot site requires 2 hours, the warm site might require 10 hours. The cold sites are sites that mainly require several weeks to be activated. They just have the HVAC facility and the location, but they actually require lots of time to bring back the operations online. In some of the cases, companies are doing reciprocal agreements or arrangements. And these arrangements are between 2 or more companies with similar equipment and applications. So they provide the facilities to each other under adverse circumstances. But this is, not very much used these days because of privacy issues. Mainly these days we have hot sites, and many companies duplicate their information processing facilities, especially when we are using the cloud. Now it's really easy to provision like a plan B on the cloud. You can operate, for example, in West Europe region, and you can duplicate the same processing facilities or the critical processing facilities in another region in US or in the Middle East or in East Asia. So it's all an assessment based on an assessment that you do based on a business impact analysis that is being done, so that you know what are the critical applications that you have, you know what are the investment that you need to pay to protect these crown jewels and bring back operations online under the case of a cyber breach or a cyber attack. So when there's a downtime, there are some strategies. You can, if you are using a fully redundant site, you can shift to this site and the business will continue as usual. You can as well, if you are not using these high redundancies and technologies of high availability, you can go back to the basics. You can use PC-based systems to limit the processing of the critical functions locally, or you can concentrate on the most important business accounts. You can as well go to the pen and paper, and you can actually do nothing and just wait for the IT team to recover the systems. So it all actually depends on the risk appetite of the company and the investment that you are willing to pay. If you don't want to lose any data, if you want to be 24 hours online, you have to invest more and you have to create redundancies and invest in high availability technology. Meanwhile, if you don't want to pay that much, you have many alternatives, as we have seen here on the screen. So we have 2 questions before we wrap up this section. Contingency plans for information systems would or should include appropriate backup agreement. Which of the following arrangements would be considered too vendor dependent when vital operations require most immediate availability of computer resources? We have the hot site, cold site, hot and cold, and using access capacity. So too vendor dependent, it means that it needs some time and it needs vendor intervention. So actually hot site can be operational within 2 hours. It doesn't need it's not too vendor independent or dependent. So the answer here is cold site, because it requires intervention from the staff, it requires intervention from the vendors, and it takes lots of weeks to be up, running and operational. Question 2. An essential element of a disaster recovery plan is a statement of system development standards, history of modification, application planned for new developments, responsibilities of each organizational unit. The answer here is, of course, responsibilities of each organization unit. You need to have the contact list or contact tree of all the personnel that needs to be available once a disaster strikes. And all of these people concerned need to know their roles and responsibilities under these circumstances. It's good to mention here that this is applied or this is applicable whether you have an on-prem setup or whether you are on the cloud. Same concepts of business continuity and contingency planning is applicable. Now, the majority of the companies are shifting to the cloud. Some of the companies are totally on the cloud, but the concept remains the same when it comes to contingency planning.